Hey folks, welcome to another episode of 5 to 15 with Musickers. I'm your host, Jason DeCristofaro, and I'm thrilled to be here with Steve Wilson. Steve, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And I should say thanks for being here, but we're at his home and he lives here, so
That was easy.
that was easy. Steve and I go way back. Steve was one of my faculty, or one of my professors, when I was doing my undergraduate, and taught me jazz and jazz theory and all kinds of great stuff. And we've become good friends over many, many years. The reason I wanted to interview Steve is because you occupy a very special position in that you've been doing this for a very long time, and you've been active and continue to be active in several different ways in the industry. We'll talk primarily as a performer, but also get a little bit into arranging. If you don't mind sharing, how long have you been professionally playing as a trombonist?
Oh gosh, about 45 years, give or take,
Wow.
maybe a little bit more. Yeah, I started as a teenager when I was in high school. I started doing my first gigs, which were like with rock bands around San Francisco, playing in horn bands and stuff like that.
Tower power kind of stuff.
Exactly, Tower Power, Earth, Wind and Fire, yeah, all that stuff.
Nice. Well, you have the distinction, I don't think a lot of people can say this, but you've performed with, and these are just a few of the names Steve has performed with, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Rosemary Clooney, George Benson. It's a very long list. And you're also somebody who is very comfortable in the jazz and commercial world as well as the classical world. You're currently principal trombonist of the Greenville Symphony.
Technically co-principal trombone, but yeah,
Right.
been playing with the Greenville Symphony now for about 36 years.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, I guess the first question I would ask is this, is what do you feel has changed in the industry for you as a performer in those 45 years?
Well, as a performer, I'm not so sure a whole lot has changed, but from the other side of it, I guess for who I perform for and how I perform and how that business is, that part's kind of changed a lot. For instance, one of the reasons I play in an orchestra is because the type of music that you mentioned earlier for Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Tony Bennett, which I was really fortunate to do when I was young, that kind of work for the most part has kind of gone away because most of those entertainers have gone away and popular music has changed dramatically in the last 4.5 decades.
For sure. When you did those gigs, let's talk a little bit about that type of work that isn't around as much anymore. What are some of those gigs that you played? This was back, I guess, in the early 80s?
Early mid 80s, yeah. Actually, I was on the house band at Harris Lake Tahoe, so just like almost all the other casinos, they had a house band, and then the entertainers would come and rotate in pretty much on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And so that's why I got to play for so many of those people, because just like when you see movies with the signs in Las Vegas and it says Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and all that,
Yeah.
Harris Lake Tahoe was kind of in that loop. So the same entertainers that played in Vegas would come up and do a week in Lake Tahoe, and so that's almost every week I got to play for a different performer, and that's why I got to play for so many of them in such a short amount of time.
Well, that's really exciting because you're learning a new book essentially. You're learning a new repertoire each week, getting to play with different people. We've talked a lot about your experiences with some of these performers. You had mentioned to me many years ago how Sammy Davis Jr. was one of your favorite artists to perform.
Yeah, no question about it. For so many reasons. First and foremost, he's one of the most talented people I've ever seen. But what really struck me about Sammy Davis Jr., so many things did, but what really struck me about him is that he never mailed in anything. Every note, every phrase, whether it was a good night or not such a great night, but even in rehearsals, he gave everything he had every single time he did it. And that really impressed me because, especially playing on that band and being in that situation, I saw some performers who they show up to the rehearsal and just kind of go through the motions. But I think it was probably just in his nature too. It wasn't so much, it was a work ethic, but I think it was just part of his makeup that he just, why do that, right? Why not give it everything you got every single time?
Yeah.
But he was also a very generous man and a very humble man. And he made a big impression on me, and I'm really grateful I had the chance to work with somebody like that.
Well, and it's interesting too because that whole culture of that sort of thinking about it almost like a 5-day week, or in some cases 6 or even 7-day a week, sort of treating it as a job, right? And having these environments that we talked about, hotels, theme parks, resorts, things like that, where you'd be touring or working in a particular setting for a while. Orchestras still have that to some degree, but in a typical orchestra season, you're looking at, for instance, Greenville Symphony, how many shows in a typical season?
Well, never really counted the shows so much, but for me, it's a per-service orchestra. But typically, we work about 1 or 2 weeks a month, and that what that entails is well, this season is, for instance, we'll have 3 or 4 rehearsals, and then we'll do 2 concerts.
Yeah, and that's significant amount for sure. But maybe it's not enough alone to stay in a career as an instrumental performer. You also do other things. You're the first call trombonist when Broadway shows.
Right, Broadway shows play at the Peace Center as well. That's the home for the Greenville Symphony. But matter of fact, 2 weeks from now, I'm playing the show Company, and then Tina's coming in after that, and Mrs. Doubtfire. So that keeps me a little bit more busy too.
Yeah. And so you do that. You're still very active always as a performer. But you also have a career as an educator, and you also have another hat you wear, which is arranging. When did that transition happen? Because for a long time you were essentially just performing primarily.
I started arranging really it was always kind of in the back of my mind, and I did a little bit of it really from the start, but it never really became something that I did on a regular basis, frankly, until I was teaching you and some of the others at Brevard College.
Yeah.
And that came out of necessity more than anything else. Also because I enjoyed doing it. But I don't know if you recall this, but the first band that I had at Brevard College was anything but a big band, and it didn't have traditional instruments. And I realized really quickly that there was no published music for the odd assortment of musicians I had. And we also, because it was a small program, we had musicians of very diverse talent levels and skill levels.
Absolutely.
So the music that you could buy from the publishers, I realized just probably wasn't going to fit the instruments I had, and like I said, the diverse skill level and talent level that I had. So I realized really quickly I needed to start providing music for the musicians I had, not the musicians that I wish I had, or that is kind of what you think of in a traditional big band. So I really started writing arrangements, not so much for trumpet and trombone and saxophone, but for Jason and Bob and Susie and that, to challenge them where they were.
Right.
And it became, I realized really quickly that was the way to go for a program like that, because it was, they worked. First of all, the arrangements worked, but it also worked for the students that I had. And I thought it worked really well. And so ever since then, I've still continued to do it. When I was directing the jazz ensemble at Anderson University, I did the same thing. But even when I got to the point where I had a 17 or 18 piece big band, I continued to write because I enjoyed so much, but also for those very same reasons.
Right, you can cater it to whatever level the students are at and really help the ones who are feeling challenged not feel overwhelmed, and the ones maybe who need something more complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you remember very well that you had solos on just about every tune that we had, because you were one of the few who was willing to do it and had the desire to do it. And a lot of students that were in the band that loved playing in the band but just didn't really feel comfortable improvising. And you probably remember that I always made it available for students to do, but never made it mandatory that they perform improvised solos. And some jazz educators might not agree with that approach, but I thought for the program that I had at the time, it was the right way to go.
Well, this brings up a really interesting point too, which is I think for a lot of younger people who might be watching this too, and folks who are in school studying music and they're thinking about, I want to be a performer, I'm doing a music performance degree, that's my career path, and you had and continue to have that, but you found yourself in many situations where you had to adapt and employ other skills that you had developed. What advice would you give, particularly to students in music school right now who maybe are like, this is what I'm going to do, this is my focus? What advice would you give them after 45 years of working, teaching, and arranging as a musician to develop a career?
Oh gosh, well, first of all, don't pigeonhole yourself into doing any one thing. Because almost every musician that I've known over the years, especially younger players, think I'm going to be a performer and that's what I'm going to practice. I'm going to be the best player I can. But every performing musician I know has at some time taught as well. So that's a big part of it too. And also, your life is going to change. You're going to have detours. You're going to have all sorts of roadblocks and detours, and all sorts of things that come into your life. And you need to be open to being flexible, to trying different things, and preparing yourself to do different things as well. And also, this is more of a life lesson than it is even just a music lesson, but you shouldn't hold yourself to the ideas of an 18-year-old when you're 28 or 38 or 48. Just because you thought you knew what you wanted to do at 18, and maybe you still do, but things change, and your ideas of what you might want to do change, and the music industry has changed dramatically, so it's probably a good idea to be flexible.
Well, so this question sort of ties into two elements of that, which is what about your goals musically now are different from when you started out? And is there any connection with changes in the industry, or is this more of a personal thing?
Probably a combination of both. Let me see. Let me revisit that a little bit because there was a lot in there. How have my goals changed?
Yeah. So from when you were in music school to now.
Yeah. So that's a really good question because I think part of the biggest, maybe one of my biggest regrets as a musician or throughout my career is, looking back, I don't think I really had a plan. I didn't have a plan to monetize what I was doing. I had a plan to practice. I knew what I needed to be able to play in order to be successful, and I went after that pretty ferociously, honestly. I practiced really hard. I looked at what other trombone players were doing, and I thought I need to be able to do that and more, right? Because you want to be able to stand out. I didn't, how can I put this? I didn't hesitate when it came to getting my name out there, calling people and saying, hey, this is who I am. If you haven't heard of me, you need to hear about me. So that, I didn't have any issues with that, but I didn't really have, like I said, a plan. Now, back in my day, we didn't really have a lot of business, music business classes. So I'm not blaming anything on the education I had. It just really wasn't a part of what's going on in music education these days. So I have been successful, I think, in terms of playing the instrument, getting to where I feel like I've somewhat mastered the instrument, if you will. It's a never-ending quest, of course, but never really settled into. I kind of went from place to place to place musically as the opportunities arose, and I didn't really have a game plan of exactly what I wanted to do or really where I saw myself. It was kind of just looking for the next gig, looking for the next job.
Well, hindsight's 2020. I think also when you started your career, as you mentioned, there were just more opportunities to play, especially as a brass player.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So you were sort of just doing what made sense at the time when you were in school, and you've adapted over the years, and you've seen how trends have changed. If you were to go to school now, let's say you're starting your career right now, 2024 in music, what are some things you think you might prioritize that might be different from growing up?
Yeah, that's a good question because there's so much more available now. And honestly, I'm not sure I know everything that is available, but I would take some business classes. Certainly I would take music tech to become savvy in that. Maybe some courses, or even just finding somebody that could mentor you in internet marketing, because that certainly wasn't around 45 years ago.
There was no social media back then.
Yeah, it's completely different now, and I think it's absolutely vital now. So just become as knowledgeable as you can about every aspect that can help you get yourself out there and be successful at what you're doing.
That's wonderful. Well, Steve, before we go, where can people learn more about what you do, your various projects, and your music?
Well, that's a good question because I'm not out there so much right now. I do have a few recordings on YouTube, and you can, if you can find me, you can listen to them. It's Stephen K. Wilson, because there's so many Steve Wilsons out there. I had to figure out somewhere to set myself apart. But you can contact me through the websites at Clemson University. I teach trombone and low brass there, and I teach at the Governor's School here in Greenville, South Carolina.
Steve, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Wonderful. Have a great day, y'all.